Every year, millions of people over 60 do exactly what they've been told to do for decades. They lose weight. The number on the scale finally drops, and it feels like a win. But what if losing weight after 60 isn't the solution everyone assumes it is? What if, for some people, it's the start of a very different problem? It makes sense why people chase this. For most of adult life, the message has been simple. The lighter you are, the healthier you are. Doctors recommend it at every checkup. Family members worry less when the number goes down. Society treats it as one of the only health decisions almost nobody argues with. And the genuine benefits are real, not imagined. Losing excess weight eases pressure on aching knees and hips that have carried decades of wear. It can lower blood pressure enough to come off a daily pill. It can pull blood sugar back from the edge of a type 2 diabetes diagnosis. For a lot of people in their 60s, dropping 20 or 30 pounds means finally keeping up on a walk with the grandkids without stopping to catch their breath. It means a plane seat that isn't a struggle, or a hiking trail given up on years ago suddenly feeling possible again. There's a quiet promise underneath all of it, that this is the one health decision everyone agrees on. No conflicting headlines, no diet war debates, no nutritionists disagreeing on camera, just lose weight, live longer, live better, simple as that. So when someone steps on a scale after 3 months of real discipline and watches the number finally move in the right direction, it doesn't just feel like progress, it feels like proof. Proof they're taking control of their own aging instead of letting it happen to them. Proof the next 20 years will look different from what their parents went through. And for a while, sometimes for months, that feeling is completely, fully justified. Most people assume the hard part is the diet itself. The willpower, the cravings, the slowing metabolism everyone blames once they hit 60. Except that part isn't even true. Metabolism barely changes at all between someone's 20s and their 60s. It only starts dropping afterward, and even then, by less than 1% a year. So if it's not a slowing metabolism sabotaging things, what is it? What if the hardest part isn't getting the weight off at all? What if the body doesn't actually know the difference between fat it doesn't need and muscle it absolutely cannot survive without? And after 60, losing weight the same way you did at 30 means losing something you can't simply gain back. Picture someone who decides at 67 to finally get serious. Smaller portions, fewer carbs, a daily walk before breakfast. Within 4 months, 18 pounds are gone. Friends compliment how much younger they look in photos. But what most people don't realize is that weight loss after 60 doesn't come off the way it did at 30. Roughly a quarter of everything an older adult loses through dieting isn't fat at all. It's fat-free mass, muscle, bone. The exact tissue the body spends a lifetime building and almost no time after 60 replacing on its own. That's because the body has already been quietly losing muscle for years before anyone notices anything. Somewhere around 6% of total muscle mass disappears every decade after midlife, even in people who never diet at all. By 80, someone may have lost close to a third of the muscle they had at 20, just from existing. You can see the scale of this hiding in plain sight in an unlikely place: world weightlifting records. The same lifts that decline gradually through someone's 30s and 40s suddenly fall off a cliff after that. Men's records drop by about 30% between ages 30 and 60, and women's by more than half. That's not laziness, and it's not lack of effort. That's biology, working quietly in the background the entire time, with or without a diet. So when that 67-year-old adds a calorie deficit on top of a body already losing muscle in the background, something strange happens. The body meets part of that deficit by breaking down the exact tissue it can least afford to lose. There's even a name doctors use for the result: sarcopenic obesity, the strange in-between state where someone's body fat percentage barely moves, but the muscle underneath it quietly disappears. Someone can go from overweight but strong to normal weight but weak without ever realizing the trade they just made. The scale tells one story. The body, underneath the skin, tells a completely different one. Here's where it gets harder to wave off. Because muscle was never really about how someone looks in a photo. It's about whether they can catch themselves before they fall. There's a pattern geriatric doctors describe again and again, almost like they're telling the same story with different names attached. Someone who is overweight but completely capable. They gardened most mornings. They carried groceries up 2 flights of stairs without thinking twice. They walked 2 miles before lunch most days. Then they lose 30 pounds the exact way every guideline told them to. 6 months later, they've fallen 3 times, small stumbles that never used to matter, suddenly landing them on the floor. A year later, a hip fracture changes the entire shape of their life. What most people don't realize is that unintentional or aggressive weight loss is one of the strongest predictors doctors have for frailty. And frailty isn't a vague word doctors throw around. It's a measurable, compounding risk. Frail older adults face a dramatically higher chance of dying within a few years compared to people who aren't frail. In some studies, close to double the risk. Not because they were sicker to begin with, but because their bodies no longer have the reserve to absorb a bad fall, a bad flu, a rough week in the hospital. And a hip fracture in particular isn't a minor injury at that age, the way a broken wrist might be at 30. Roughly 1 in 5 people who fracture a hip after 65 will die within the following year, a number that stayed stubbornly high for decades despite enormous progress in surgery and medicine. Because the fracture itself usually isn't what kills someone. It's everything frailty does after it. The loss of mobility, the hospital-acquired infections, the slow slide into dependence on other people for things they used to do without thinking. And it doesn't stop at one diet. Older adults who lose weight and then regain it tend to gain back more fat and less muscle than they had before, meaning each attempt at fixing their weight can quietly leave them in a worse position than where they started, even if the scale eventually settles at the same number. So a goal that began as get healthier can end as lose independence. Not because weight loss is inherently dangerous, but because nobody ever mentioned that losing the wrong 25% of the weight matters infinitely more than losing the number itself. But here's the part that actually surprised the researchers studying it. For decades, doctors operated on one simple rule: lower BMI, lower risk, no exceptions. Then they started actually following older adults for years at a time instead of assuming, and the data refused to behave the way anyone expected. In study after study, slightly overweight adults over 65, not obese, just modestly heavier than the textbook ideal, lived as long or longer than people sitting right in the so-called normal range. The BMI linked to the lowest risk of death doesn't stay parked at 25 the way it does for someone in their 30s. After 65, it actually climbs into the high 20s, sometimes higher. Being thin, it turns out, isn't automatically being safe. Being underweight in your 70s is consistently linked to higher mortality than being modestly overweight, across dozens of studies pooled together by researchers trying to settle the question once and for all. That single fact quietly undoes a belief most people have carried since their 20s, and for some, unlearning it is harder than the diet itself ever was. And then there's the moment that made even doctors pause and double-check their numbers. The newest generation of weight loss drugs, the ones marketed as the smartest, safest way to lose weight in human history, got measured the same way researchers measure everything else. Scientists running mouse studies on these same drugs found something that complicated the picture even further. Muscle mass changed less dramatically than feared in some cases, but the muscle that remained still came out measurably weaker, almost as if quantity and strength had quietly become two different problems. In human trials, people lost a meaningful share of their body weight in under a year and a half. And of everything they lost, 10% or more was muscle. Researchers ran the numbers and described it in a way that's hard to unhear once you've heard it. That kind of muscle loss, that fast, is roughly equivalent to 20 years of natural aging, compressed into 18 months. Not from a crash diet someone improvised on their own, from the treatment doctors consider state-of-the-art. The deepest cost here was never really physical at all. It was believing the safest, most modern, most doctor-approved solution couldn't possibly be doing this, and discovering that modern and muscle-safe were never actually the same promise. This isn't a fringe theory whispered in one corner of nutrition science. Geriatricians have been raising it loudly enough that mainstream outlets started asking the question directly, out loud, in plain language: is the most popular weight loss drug in the world quietly aging older patients' muscles faster than the disease it was prescribed to fix? Doctors interviewed on the subject now recommend something that would have sounded strange 5 years ago: Don't just take the drug, pair it deliberately with resistance training and an almost stubborn focus on protein, or risk losing the exact tissue that makes the weight loss worth having in the first place. One pharmaceutical maker, asked directly about it, confirmed through their own clinical sub-study that the drug did reduce lean body mass alongside fat, less than fat, but not nothing, and not zero. Researchers in Belgium studying older bariatric surgery patients found something similar playing out on an entirely different scale. Patients in their late 60s and 70s who lost close to a third of their body weight came out the other side with measurably less lean mass than patients who lost weight more slowly through non-surgical means, and noticeably weaker grip strength to go with it. And when researchers pooled together every major study they could find on weight and mortality in older adults, more than 50 studies spanning multiple countries, multiple health conditions, multiple decades, the majority of the ones tracking long-term survival kept landing on the same uncomfortable pattern, again and again, in places researchers weren't necessarily looking for it. None of this came from one outlier study or one dramatic headline that got blown out of proportion. It came from doctors and researchers running into the same wall from completely different directions. Independently, without coordinating, weight loss after 60 simply behaves differently than weight loss at 30. And the body doesn't read the diet plan the same way twice. So here's the paradox, laid all the way out. The problem was never losing weight after 60. The problem was believing that losing weight would automatically mean getting healthier. Full stop, no asterisks, no fine print. Weight loss after 60 has real, genuine benefits. Less strain on aching joints, better blood sugar control, more mobility, sometimes more years on the calendar. That part was never the lie, and it's not the lie now. But it also carries a real cost, hiding in plain sight inside every pound that comes off. The quiet question of what exactly is leaving the body along with the fat. The smartest approach was never, don't lose weight. And it was never, weight loss is secretly dangerous, avoid it. It was simply this, protect the muscle on the way down, the same way you'd protect anything else you couldn't afford to lose. Eat enough protein to give the body a reason to hold on to what it has. Add resistance training, even something as modest as bodyweight exercises twice a week, so the body gets a clear signal to preserve strength instead of cannibalizing it for fuel. Track more than just the scale. Track grip strength. Track how easily someone can stand up from a chair without using their hands. Track whether the stairs feel the same as they did 6 months ago. The goal was never really the number. It was always the years of walking unassisted that number was supposed to represent in the first place. People who understand that end up with both sides of the equation, the real health benefits that come with losing weight, and the muscle that actually lets them enjoy a longer life, instead of a longer, weaker one. Next time, we're looking at why so many people spend their 60s terrified of a heart attack, and what we found about that fear might surprise you more than the heart attack itself.